Will there be a war between US and China in the 21st century?
If there is, we're finished. Okay. A war between the US and China would destroy the possibilities of organized life on Earth. In fact, we can put it differently. Unless the US and China reach an accommodation and work together and cooperatively, it's very unlikely that organized human society will survive. We are facing enormous problems, destruction of the environment, pandemics, threat of nuclear war. None of these decline of democratic functioning of an arena for rational discourse. None of these things have boundaries. We either work together to overcome them, which we can do, or we'll all sink together. That's the real question we should be asking. What the United States is doing is not helping. So current US policy, which is perfectly open, nothing secret about it, is to what's called encircle China, it's the official word, with sentinel states, South Korea, Japan, Australia, uh, which will be heavily armed, provided by Biden with precision weapons aimed at China, backed by major naval operations. Huge naval operation just took place in the Pacific. Many nations participating. RIMPAC didn't get reported here as far as I know, but an enormous operation threatening China. All of this to encircle China, to continue with policies like that. Somebody like Pelosi, just to probably to make her look more, I don't know what her motives are, taking a highly provocative, stupid act opposed by the military, opposed by the White House. Yes, acts like that, which of course called forth a response, highly dangerous. We don't have to do that. We don't have to increase the threat. I mean, right now, the last NATO summit, take a look at it. For the first time, it invited to attend countries that are in the sentinel states surrounding China, encircling China from the east. And it, in fact, extended the range of NATO to what's called the Indo-Pacific region. So all of us, by now, the North Atlantic includes the whole Indo-Pacific region to try to ensure that we can overcome the so-called China threat. Incidentally, we might ask exactly what the China threat is. It's done sometimes. So, former Prime Minister of Australia, Paul Keating, well-known international diplomat, had an article a while ago in the Australian press, that's right in the claws of the dragon, going through what the China threat is. He ran through the various claims, finally concluded the China threat is that China exists. It exists. It does not follow US orders. It's not like Europe. Europe does what the United States tells it to do, even if it doesn't like it. China just ignores what the US says. Now, there's a formal way of describing this. There are two versions of the international order. One version is the UN-based international order, which theoretically we subscribe to, but we don't accept. The UN-based international order is unacceptable to the United States because it bans US foreign policy. Literally, it explicitly bans the threat or use of force in international affairs. except under circumstances that almost never arise. Well, that's U.S. foreign policy. Try to find a president who isn't engaged in the threat or use of force in international affairs. Okay, so obviously we can't accept the UN-based uh, international system, even though under the Constitution that's the supreme law of the land. But it doesn't matter. So the United States has what's called a rule-based international order. That's acceptable because it's the United States that sets the rules. So we want a rule-based international order where the US sets the rules. In commentary in the United States, even in scholarship, almost 100% calling for a rule-based international order. Is that false? No, it's true. Is it propaganda? Of course it's propaganda because of what's not said and because of what's presupposed. An answer to an earlier question. Well, China does not accept the rule-based international order. So when the US imposes demands, Europe may not like them, but they follow them. China ignores them. So take, for example, the US sanctions on Iran. The US has to punish Iran because the United States unilaterally pulled out of the the Iran nuclear agreements. So in order to punish Iran for our wrecking the agreements in violation of Security Council orders, we impose very harsh sanctions. Europe strongly opposes the sanctions, condemned them harshly, but it adheres to them because you don't disobey US orders. That's too dangerous. China ignores them. They're not keeping to the rule based international order. Well, that's unacceptable. In fact, it's said pretty openly. You can hear the Secretary of State and others saying China is challenging our global hegemony. Yes, they are. They don't accept US global hegemony, especially in the waters off China. So that's a China threat. They do a lot of rotten things, China. I mean, internally, there's all kind of repression, violence, and so on. But first of all, that's not a threat to us. And second, the US doesn't care about it because it easily accepts and supports comparable crimes and atrocities internal to allies. So, yes, we should protest it, but without hypocrisy. We have no standing to protest it. We support comparable things in all sorts of other places. Just take a look at the U.S. foreign aid. The leading recipient is U.S. foreign aid is Israel, which is engaged in constant terror, violence, and repression, constant, almost daily. Second leading recipient is Egypt, under the worst dictatorship in Egypt's history. About 60,000 people in jail, prison, political prisoners, tortured, and so on. Do we care? No. Second leading recipient. I mean, what are we talking about? That's why most of the world just laughs at us. There's a lot of uh, failure to understand here about why the global South doesn't join us in our uh, proxy war against Russia, fighting Russia until it's severely weakened. They don't join us. Here, the question is what's wrong with them? Look into their minds to figure out what's wrong. And they have a different attitude. They say, yes, we oppose the invasion of Ukraine, terrible crime. But what are you talking about? This is what you do to us all the time. You don't care about crimes like this. That's most of the global South. We can't comprehend that because we're so insulated that we are just obviously right, and everyone who doesn't go along must be wrong.
Do you think the United States, as a global leader, as an empire, may collapse in this century? Why and how will it happen, and how can we avoid it?
The United States can certainly harm itself severely. That's what we're doing right now. Right now, the greatest threat to the United States is internal, countries tearing itself apart. Uh, I mean, I really don't have to run through it with you. Take a look at something as elementary as mortality. The United States is the only country outside of war, life expectancy is declining, mortality is increasing. That doesn't happen anywhere. You take a look at health outcomes generally, they're among the worst among the developed societies. And health spending is about twice as high as the developed societies. You look at the charts, all of this starts around the late 1970s, early 80s. If you go back to that point, the United States was pretty much a normal developed country in terms of mortality, uh, incarceration, health expenses, other measures. Since then, the United States has fallen off the chart. It's gone way off the chart. Well, that's the neoliberal assault of the last 40 years. It's had a major effect on the United States. It's left a lot of anger, resentment, violence. Meanwhile, the Republican Party has simply drifted off the spectrum. It's not a normal political party in any usual sense, not what it used to be. Its main policy is block anything in order to regain power. That's its policy, stated almost openly by McConnell, followed religiously by the entire Congress. That's not the acts of a political party. It's so it's, of course democracy's declined, the violence has increased, the judgments, the decisions of the Supreme Court. The court's the most reactionary court in memory. To go back to the 19th century, decision after decision is an effort to create a country of white supremacist Christian nationalists. I mean, scarcely hidden if you read the opinions of Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and others. It's so yes, we can destroy ourselves from within, and in fact, the ways we're doing it are almost astonishing. So it's well known, for example, everybody knows that U.S. infrastructure, bridges, subways, and so on, is in terrible shape, needs a lot of repair. The American Association of Engineers gives it a failing mark every year. All right, finally, Congress did pass a limited infrastructure bill, say rebuild bridges and so on. It has to be called a China Competition Act. We can't rebuild our bridges because they're falling apart. We have to rebuild our bridges to beat China. It's pathological. And that's what's happening inside the country. Take Thomas's decision in the recent case in which he invalidated a New York law. This is last October, couple weeks ago. Invalidated a New York law going back to 1913 that required people to have some justification if they wanted to carry concealed weapons in public. He withdrew that with a very interesting decision. He said the the United States, he said, is such a decaying, collapsing, hateful society that people just have to have guns. I mean, how can you expect somebody to go to the grocery store without a gun in a country as disgusting and hideous as this one? It's essentially what he said. Those weren't his words, but they were the import.